inside. I'm tired of fighting the good fight. If you say the word, then I'll say goodbye. Wherever I see
All right, everybody, let's stand up. Average human attention span's 12 minutes. You've been sitting for far longer than that. Stand up. I want you to repeat something after me. You ready? Okay, repeat after me. I'm a miracle. That was really good. One more time. I am a miracle. So we're going to talk today about how your opinion of yourself is elevated, how you're overconfident, and you make a ton of dumb mistakes, you little miracles. So sit down, okay? Sit down. One of the biggest honors of my career is that someone once referred to me as a younger Nick Murray, right? And I can be just as grumpy as Nick, so buckle up, okay? So there have been 107 billion people to have ever lived on this planet, which is roughly equivalent to the number of stars in the night sky. So the next time the next time you're camping, I want you to look up in the night sky and think about the enormity of humankind. There have been 15 people dead for every one of us alive today, and yet you are a miracle. I wasn't picking on you. You are a miracle because of those 107 billion people, none of them have been quite like you. But we do have a lot in common. We do have certain behavioral traits that we share, and one of my favorite things that Nick talked about was the immutability of human behavior, and we're going to talk about some of the pillars that make up that immutable nature of how we and all of our clients behave. To do this, to set up this conversation, I'm going to talk about your brain, your body, the society in which we all live, and then we're going to talk about 4 of our most common human tendencies and how they lead us to make poor investment decisions. So we're going to start at the very beginning of life and talk about the miracle of humankind. Because when you were born, you had twice as many neurons, twice as many taste buds, and twice the heart rate that you now do. Your bones, when you were born, were 4 times as tough as concrete. You sneezed at 100 miles an hour, and your heart pumped blood through your veins 1,000 times a day. Even with all of our technological advances, we still have not matched the enormity and the complexity of humankind. But for all of our miraculous nature, we are still prone to some very, very detrimental tendencies, and we are very weak in other ways. So if we look at the history of humankind, we didn't used to be the only game in town. There were at one time, thousands and thousands of years ago, there were at one time as many as 12 different humanoid species. But we are the only ones left. Homo sapiens are the only ones left, and there's a very distinct reason why. You might think it's because we're smarter, because we had better art. You might think it was because we had better economic systems, but it was actually because we were the most chicken. We were the most scared, okay? When other humanoid species were running around trying to throw a spear at a tiger, right? They went for it. We said, you know what, I'm going to hang back in the cave. I'm good over here. Every one of us is alive today because our great ancestors were cowards, okay? That is why we lived on and the others didn't. And we carry this fear of loss and this fear of risk with us to this day. And it has been so important to our evolution and our constancy and our flourishing as a species that the brain actually holds on to scary moments. Research in my newest book, The Behavioral Investor, talks about some studies where the brain hard codes fear around certain scary situations into our brain so that they are easily brought back to the forefront when we see anything that looks like that situation again. So each and every one of your clients have a part of their brain, a physical piece of their brain that is labeled March of 2009. And when they see any bump or gyration in the markets, they go right back there. Because that fearful encoding has led to our thriving. But that's not the only way that our bodies are weak. I want to talk about another study featured in the Behavioral Investor that is one of my favorites. It was an 1,100 case study that looked at the way that judges in Israel make decisions about whether to be strict or lenient with the people that they're sentencing. So they looked at a number of variables around these sentencing procedures, and they found that the most predictive variable about whether a judge would be harsh or lenient on the person sitting in front of them was how recently that judge had had a snack. Okay? You start off the day, if you look at this chart, you start off the day with about a 70% chance of leniency. But if you are the last person that gets seen before lunch, God help you, you are going to the electric chair, right? But after lunch, if they see you, you're back around 65% chance of getting off. But if you get seen at 2:30 or 3 o'clock before they have that Snickers, you're done, right? Now think about this, though. If they ask those judges, Judge, why did you throw the book at this individual? Do you think that judge would say, I was influenced by subtle bodily cues? They would not. They would point to a host of more sensible reasons. They would couch it in terms of their expertise. But if some of the smartest people in one of the most developed countries and civilizations that the world has ever seen can base something so life-changing on how recently they have eaten, how dumb are we? How flawed are we when it comes to making the important decisions that we have to make around our money? So that's your body. Weak, easily moved from a set point. So let's talk about your brain, and let's go back to baby you. So when you were born, you were about 5% of your final size, but your brain was already 35% of its final size. And it would grow another 55% in just the next 3 months. Okay, 55% again in just the next 3 months. So your brain is enormously important, always has been, but for all of its importance, it's really, really outdated. So when we look at ethnographic research, when we look at anthropological research, we see that our brains have not had an upgrade in 150,000 years. Our brains have not evolved in 150,000 years, despite the fact that developed economic capital markets like the ones in which we navigate with these brains today are only 400 or 500 years old. Okay? You have the iPhone 1 of brains operating in an iPhone 10 world. 150,000 years without an upgrade. But there's something that's even more damning, and that's as an adult, your brain counts for about 2 to 3% of your body weight, but it accounts for 1/4 of the calories that you spend in a given day. So 2% of your weight, 25% of your metabolic spend, which means your brain is enormously, enormously inefficient and is always looking for ways to think less. Okay, this isn't a knock on any of us. This is just how we as humankind work. We're always looking for ways to think less. And how do we primarily think less? Well, there's a couple of ways we'll talk about, but one of the things that we do is that we listen to what we think are experts. So when you look at fMRIs of people who are watching financial cable news, I will not name names because I did this once before and got shouted down by a popular pundit. But when we watch cable financial news, okay, and you hook a client up to an fMRI, what happens to the part of their brain associated with critical thinking and decision making? It goes to sleep. People who are watching financial news shut off the critical thinking and decision-making part of their brains because they're trying to conserve energy and they just think, oh, this person's got it. This person's got me covered. Okay? Nick was right. The best thing that we can do for our clients is give them this holistic planning because we are always going to look for this. Clients are always going to look for their brains to be put to sleep. They always will. but it needs to be you that's tucking them in and not some goofus on CNBC, okay? And then finally, we're going to talk about society. We're going to talk about society. Because no matter whether you were born early or born late with respect to your due date, every human being is born early because our heads are so big. Our heads are so big, our brains are so big, we come out before we are fully baked, and you see this is why we are unique among the animal kingdom, okay? You look at a baby duck. Baby duck is swimming alongside its mom seconds after it's born, okay? Baby deer running around by its mom the next day. Okay? 34% of millennials live with their parents. Okay? Ducks, it takes ducks a day. It takes deer a day. 25 years on, our kids are still in the basement covered in Cheeto dust. Why is it? Why is it that just over a third of millennials still live with their parents? Because other animals have a biological imperative, and they make decisions with a biological imperative. They say, will this kill me or not? Will this keep me alive or not? That is their primary imperative when making a decision. Our imperative is very different. Ours is a sociological imperative. And the first thing that we ask is, what would other people do, or what would other people think? We are wired not to think in rational black and white terms. We are wired to think in sociological terms. And I want to share this next study with you that is truly, truly trippy. I hope it will be as Twilight Zone to you as it was to me when I first heard it. So you see on the board there slides from what's called the Asch experiment. This is a famous psychological experiment where they ask people to name the line on the right that looks most like the line on the left. So on the count of 3, when I ask you which this is, shout it out, okay? 1, 2, 3. C. Super easy. Everyone got it right. So what if I told you that 76% of the people in this study got it wrong? Because the way that Solomon Asch set this up was the following. He had a group of Confederates, people who were in on his joke, people who he was using to help manipulate the actual person he was studying. And these Confederates, 7 Confederates, are in on the joke. So it's these folks in the front row, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. All of them give the answer B. And they give it very convincingly. Oh, it's definitely B. Yeah, it's B for sure. Right? So that by the time we get to this 8th person, this poor, hapless person who does not know that they are being studied, this person is losing their mind. Because they're like, I'm looking at it, it looks like C, but like, what the heck? These other people are smart. If they think it's B, then I guess it's B. I guess I'm wrong. Okay? So 3/4 of people get it wrong, and we used to think that had primarily to do with peer pressure. But what we have done in modern times is that we have administered the Asch experiment with modern technology. We've hooked people up to fMRI machines that allow us to monitor their brain scans. And the part of the brain associated, the part of the brain that's most active during this exercise, when other people are giving their answer, is not the one associated with peer pressure. It's the one associated with sensation and perception. So what scientists now believe is other people believing that it's B actually morphs and changes the sensation and perception. It actually morphs and changes the way that we look at the lengths of the lines. Other people's dumb ideas can physically alter what you see, okay? Other people's bad ideas can physically alter the way that you take the world in. So we're screwed, right? We're screwed. We have a body that's weak and needs snacks. We have a brain that's 200,000 years old. We have a society that conspires to make us believe in goofy things that aren't true. Well, yeah, kind of. Because all of these things lead to a handful of common behavioral pitfalls, which we're going to talk about today. But once we understand them, once we understand the ways in which human behavior is immutable, to Mr. Murray's point, then we can take steps to improve this. So there's 4 ways, right? My research has been, in my 2 books, The Laws of Wealth and the new book, The Behavioral Investor, my research has been around taking the 200 and something psychological biases that psychologists like myself have identified and getting them into a workable universe so that advisors like you can do something with them. So I looked at these 200 and something variables, and I found that there were really about 4 common psychological tendencies that underlie all 200 of them. And we're going to talk about them today, okay? So the first of these is ego. That's what I was joking with you about at first. It's this overconfidence. Second is our tendency to make emotional judgments. Third is conservatism, our tendency to go with what has always worked in the past. And finally, something that I call attention, which is our preference for things that are lurid or easy to recall versus those that are probabilistic. So this will all make sense to you in a moment. Okay, ladies, where are the women at? Yeah, it's a financial conference. Yeah, it's a financial conference. Okay, louder, ladies. Okay, there you go. There you go. Okay, for all the women in the audience, I want you to look disapprovingly at a man close to you while I read the following statistics. Okay? So in a study I cited in the Laws of Wealth, 700 men surveyed. 100% of them thought they were smarter than average. Okay? 95% of them thought they were friendlier than average. 94% of them thought they were better looking and more athletic than average, okay? Is that the way that averages work, my friends? Can you have 100% of people or 95% of people above average? Okay, so this is, overconfidence is especially problematic among men, but it's problematic for us as a human species. And once again, this is one of these things evolutionarily that has led to our success, okay? No one would ever start a restaurant if we played the odds. It takes overconfidence to think that, yep, 90% of restaurants fail, but mine's going to be a winner, and do it anyway. It takes overconfidence for you to be in your business. The failure rate for what you do, my dad is an advisor, the failure rate for what you do, the attrition rate is somewhere in the 75 to 80% rate. Okay, give yourself a round of applause for freaking being here today and doing what you do. You overconfident sons of guns, right? You would have never started your business if you had thought the odds applied to you, right? So overconfidence can help us in some ways, but it can also hurt us when we apply it to the world of investing. Okay, so we're going to get biblical here. I'm from Alabama, so it's in my nature to get biblical. We're going to talk about the Christian Bible here. Sort of the Christian Bible, we'll use the King James Version to keep it fair. Okay, so all the thrivent people, where's the thrivent people at? Any thrivent people here? Okay, you are not invited to this one because I know you know the answer. Okay, if you don't know how many books are in the Bible, if you have no idea how many books are in the Bible, I want you to guess. Raise your hand. Who can guess? Raise your hand. Oh, I will pick on you. Yes, in the back. You cheater. You said 66. Yes, there's 66, you thrivent ringer. Okay. Okay. There are 66 books in the Bible. You were only supposed to play if you didn't know the answer. The average guess, okay? The average guess is 25. Okay, I did this with 100 and something people. Average guess is 25. Okay, that's fine. Good guess. But then I did something else. I said, okay, what's your guess? Most people said 25. And I said, pick a range that you are sure encompasses the correct number. Okay, any range that you are sure encompasses the correct number. So the average guess was 25. What range do you think most people chose? 25 to 35. What is a good range if someone tells you pick a range that you're sure encompasses the number? 0 to a billion, right? Like, I'm pretty sure there's between 0 and a billion books in the Bible. Did I get it right, Doc? Right? And that is not what people do. because we think that we can predict the future better than we can. This is something that psychologists call over-precision. We think we can know more about the future than we can. If we were honest with ourselves, if we were not prone to overconfidence and over-precision, there would be no financial news channels, or maybe there would be one where people just came on all day and shrugged their shoulders, right? There would be one financial news channel and people would come on CNBC all day and go, yeah, I got no idea. Yeah, I got no idea what's happening in Europe. No clue. 2020 election, you got me, right? But we're prone to over-precision, and so we think we can guess the future better than we can. The next type of overconfidence is that we have what's called rosy retrospection, which we look back on our own performance and we think we did better than we really did. I had a friend who is an HR professional. She's an HR manager, and she reached out to me recently and said, hey, for the last 9 or 10 years, I have done so well picking stocks in my portfolio that I think I need to go into the world of being a fund manager. I think I need to be an asset manager. She goes, I have been killing it. I go, whoa, good for you. Do you mind letting me look at your returns? So she shows me her returns. She has underperformed in her equity holdings. She has underperformed buy and hold S&P by about 6% a year over the last 10 years. Okay? She confused brains and a bull market, and this is something that we're all prone to doing. I cite research in the Behavioral Investor that says among day traders who swear up and down that they've beat the benchmark, a quarter of them underperformed by 15% or more, and a further 33% underperformed by 5% or more. This is the people who think they're crushing it are getting crushed. This is another way that we're overconfident. We think we remember our behavior as being better than it was. And then finally, this clip is too adorable. I can't even speak over it, so I'm going to rush. I know, I'm never going to get through this. And then the final way that we're overconfident is we think that bad things won't happen to us. Bloop. Okay. A Cook College study found that we think we're going to win the lottery and stay married forever. You ask someone, you're going to win the lottery? Yeah, might. You know, you ask someone, hey, are you going to die of cancer? You know, something you actually have quite good odds of happening to you? No, not me. No way. You're going to die of cancer or heart disease? Absolutely not. You know, the thing that basically gets us all. So we think that we're luckier than average. We think we're smarter than average. We think we're luckier than average. So what do we do about this? Well, one of the things that we do is diversify. We help our clients understand that the life of an average stock is ruinous. Over 50% of individual equities go to zero. Okay? The life of the average stock is absolutely ruinous. So the first thing that we do is we are humble. Diversification across asset classes to include having the right types of insurance is the exact embodiment of the phrase, I don't know what's going to happen, so I'm going to be prepared for anything. The next thing that we do is we teach about toilets. This is something that the physicist Richard Feynman did. When he found someone who was overconfident, he had them teach. Because you ask the average person, hey, do you know how a toilet works? And they go, yeah, I know how a toilet works. You go, oh, he goes, oh, well, cool. Teach me about the mechanics of how a toilet works. And they go, oh, never mind, right? When we have to teach something, when we have to lay out our thesis, we understand the gaps in our understanding. So the next time your clients come to you wanting to buy Bitcoin or Indonesian REITs or whatever off-the-wall banana bonkers thing they bring to your table, go, okay, cool, explain the blockchain to me, genius, and then we'll talk about your Bitcoin, okay? Teaching brings about humility. And then another one, we won't have time to cover all of these, but the last one I want to talk about is a pre-mortem, which is where we try and identify points of weakness from the outset. We look at a financial plan and we say, what is the point of failure here? If something were to go wrong with your financial life, what would it be? I use this a lot with folks where I live. I live in Atlanta now. There's a lot of Fortune 500 wealth there, a lot of Aflac, UPS, Coke millionaires there who are heavily, heavily invested in a single stock. And you say, look, if this were to go off the rails, what would be the point of failure? And that pre-mortem can be powerful. So the second thing we're going to talk about, the second behavioral tendency, is conservatism, which is this tendency of ours to rely on doing things the ways that they've always been done, or to confuse what we're familiar with what is safe. So the formula you see on the board there is how economists think you chose what to have for breakfast. Okay? Is this how you chose what kind of cereal to pick out this morning? I ask you, my friends. Right? Did you use subjective expected utility theorems to decide whether or not to go to the gym and what to have for breakfast? You did not, because we make 12.7 million decisions per year. We make 30-something thousand decisions per day. And the idea that each one of these decisions is a carefully weighed out rational exercise strains credulity. It is absolutely not the case. So one of the things that we do is that we rely on what we have always done. And we see this all over in business and in life. We see this in my adopted hometown of Atlanta. You think about the worst business, when you went to B school, you got your MBA. What did you learn about as the do not do example of a product rollout? It was probably New Coke. You probably learned about the idiots at Coke and how they just bungled everything. But the New Coke story is not an example of a bad product rollout, because New Coke was preferred to Coke Classic 3-1 in blind taste tests. Okay? Somewhere in a vault in Atlanta, there is a more delicious Coke that we can't have because we're so conservative that we can't have nice things. Because they rolled out New Coke and everyone lost their minds. Is it because they didn't like it? Is it because it wasn't delicious? It was not, right? It was not because it wasn't delicious. It was because they were so tied to Coke Classic, and Coke had done such a great job of wrapping their brand in the American flag and Santa Claus and the 4th of July, that when we took away Coke Classic, people lost their minds. People confuse what they are familiar with what's good. We see this too with the Mona Lisa. Okay, so the Mona Lisa is the most parodied, the most reproduced, the most replicated, and most visited piece of art in the world. Is it because it's the best piece of art in the world? No, look at it. It's goofy, right? It's not great. Look at the Mona Lisa. Here's why the Mona Lisa is popular. The Mona Lisa sat for many, many years in a dusty corner of the Louvre, and no one cared about it. Hey, do you know this? Nobody cared about the Mona Lisa for years, and it should have always been that way with this unextraordinary piece of art. Okay? Then the Mona Lisa was stolen. The Mona Lisa was stolen, and it took them 3 days to figure out it was missing. Okay? It took them 3 days to notice it was gone because no one was looking for it. But once it was missing, it became a source of national intrigue. Everyone wondered, where's the Mona Lisa? Who's taken it? So every night on the nightly news, you would see who's taken the Mona Lisa and backstory on the Mona Lisa and what happened to it and where can it be found. And it was apprehended, the folks who took it were apprehended a couple of years later. And once it was returned to the Louvre, it has since that time been the most famous, most studied, most talked about piece of art in the world. It isn't because it's good, it's because we have heard of it. I'm going to make one political comment that roasts both sides of the aisle, so don't yell at me in your feedback forms. Do you think that Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton, of the 350 million people in the US, were the two best and brightest that we could come up with? Right? Do you think, statistically only, it is unlikely So why were they our options? They were our options because they were both household names. You had heard of them, and so we were likely to vote for them. So how do we take and overcome conservatism? Well, there's a couple of things we do. First of all, we have to encourage our clients to buy what they don't know. People have a natural tendency to overinvest in their home country, in their industry, and even their geographic region within the US. We see that people in the Northeast tend to be overweight financials. People in the Midwest tend to be overweight agricultural stocks. We have to, at every turn, fight this tendency for people to want to buy what they have heard of and buy what they know and diversify across a much broader range of asset classes. The next thing we need to encourage our clients to do, we have to have mechanisms to slow them down. Because when people get in a hurry, they go with what they have always gone with. If we can just slow them down, if we can just get them to sleep on a decision, we will dramatically decrease their tendency to go with the status quo. And then how can we understand the lessons of Trump and Clinton to sell with our own businesses? How can we use this understanding to make more sales, to engage in the dreaded prospecting that Nick talked about? Well, we can do this with what's called mere exposure effect. And mere exposure effect is this idea in psychology that we like something just because we have heard of it. You need to be out in your community. You need to be in the flyers for the symphony. You need to be putting on educational programs. You need to be coming to speak to Mrs. Jones' 4th grade class about financial literacy. You need to be out there and you need to be heard of, because people's biggest determinant in deciding whether or not to work with you is whether they have heard of you. So how can you get out there and be heard of? Next, we're going to talk about attention, which is our tendency to confuse probability or likelihood with what's called salience or ease of recollection. So to give a concrete example of this, I'd ask you to think back to where you were on 9/11. This is one of those moments in time where history is divided into before and after. You will never forget where you were. I was actually in college. I went to college in Utah a couple hours earlier in the day, and I just remember I was still asleep. I remember my mom calling me and saying, "Wake up, they're bombing the Pentagon." We still didn't know what was going on, and I'll never forget turning on the TV and watching those events unfold that day. And we lost 3,000 people that day, and it's a tragedy, and one that we will never forget. But there was a tragedy on top of that tragedy that we don't talk about because it's subtle and insidious. And this is in that the months following 9/11, another 1,600 people died that would have otherwise lived. So again, half again as many people as perished on 9/11 died in the wake of 9/11 because of a decision that they made based on faulty reasoning. And that decision is one we make all the time. They decided to drive. If you remember what happened in the wake of 9/11, everyone was scared of getting on airplanes. And getting on an airplane post 9/11 became this sort of brave, patriotic thing to do. But lots of people remained scared because that vision of the planes crashing into the towers was still very vivid. They really understood it. It was very top of mind. So people who would have otherwise flown started driving long, long distances. Driving is, of course, much more dangerous than flying. And so we lost another 1,600 more people because auto fatalities increased so much that year because of our fear about flying. This is something that happens all over the place. Like we pass aside low probability, high salience threats for things that are much more common. This is a real statistic. 50 times as many people died last year taking selfies as did from shark attacks, and yet we're all scared of sharks and no one's scared of selfies, right? So this tendency to look for the dramatic or the lurid or the sensational also causes us to do something else in our businesses, and that's to overlook simple solutions. Is there anyone here from Alabama? This is a shoes and shirt only party, so maybe not, okay? So I'm from there. I can make fun of it. I'm from there. So I grew up in Alabama. I'm actually quite proud of being from Alabama. I grew up in a place called Huntsville, which has a rich tradition of involvement in the space industry, has one of the most educated populations in the country. It's a really great place to grow up. And so growing up in Huntsville, you drive down the freeway, and there's a Saturn V rocket, and there's a big space shuttle, and there's all kinds of space paraphernalia at the Space and Rocket Center there. So I grew up absolutely in love with the shuttle. And in my memories, the shuttle always has that orange kind of rust-colored tank, but it wasn't always the case. Because if you go look at early versions of the shuttle launches, they actually have a white solid rocket booster. They have a white tank there in the middle. And the reason is this. NASA, in those original stages, could not get the shuttle to work because it weighed 700 pounds too much. 700 pounds too much. And so they did what rocket scientists do, which is they experimented with space-age polymers and better aerodynamics, and they were trying everything they could to cut 700 pounds of weight. And they failed. They failed again and again and again to cut the weight or to get it where it needed to be. Until a line worker came by and saw what they were doing. I like to imagine that he's from Alabama in my mind. I don't know this for a fact. He walks by and says, what are they doing? And they say, oh, they're trying to cut weight on the shuttle. And this line worker goes, quit painting the damn tank. They stopped painting the tank, 700 pounds of paint on the tank, okay? That's why the shuttle tank is orange, because it weighed too much, okay? What is the analog of this in our business? We are always looking for something sophisticated or complex or next level to take our businesses to appeal to the modern consumer. But like Nick said, a lot of times what we need to do is actually a throwback. We need to get back to best practices, do something very simple that might have a huge impact. So how do we help our clients avoid falling prey to this attentional bias? Well, there's a couple of things that we need to do. First of all, if an idea falls in line with your own political or personal biases, you need to be double and triple scrutinous of that idea. We have a cancer in our country right now of investing along political lines and thinking that whoever's in the Oval Office, that the economy is going to be good or bad based on whether or not we like the person who we see on TV every day. We have to help break our clients of this and help them to be extra critical of things that align with their own biases. We also need to look at probabilities. You know, Nick shared some great probabilities there. We need to go to couples on their wedding day. We need to go to a couple on their wedding day and say, hey, congratulations, Mazel Tov, great, I'm so happy for you. And then we need to say, excuse me, what do you think the odds of you two getting divorced are? And if they say anything less than 50%, we need to lecture them on probabilities, right? No, I'm joking, of course, but the understanding is this. When we understand how likely or unlikely something is, we have to base our assumptions on that and not just hopes. We need to be scientists. And the final thing that we do is that we rely on emotion. We don't ask, is this risky or safe? We ask, is it fun? This is something that all of us do when we're trying to answer a harder question. When we go to the voting booth, we don't ask who has a better foreign policy. We ask, would I like to have a beer with that person? I promise you that people do this. And when we're trying to evaluate investment options, we don't ask, is this risky or safe? We ask, is this fun? Is this enjoyable? We see this with boating. Boating is super dangerous. Okay, boating is very, very dangerous. Thousands of people die from boating every year. Do we think boating is dangerous? No, because it's awesome, right? We don't think of boating as dangerous because it's a good time. What about investing? What about long-term investing? There has not been one long-term investment horizon in the history of this great country that has been anything but stupendous. Long-term, multi-asset class, well-diversified investing with the appropriate amount of insurance is exactly the kind of thing that is enormously safe. but we have not done a good job as an industry of making it fun. We haven't made the process enjoyable. We haven't helped people discover something about themselves, and as a result, people are relying on emotion as this sort of primal risk tolerance questionnaire. Because research shows that whether or not someone feels that this was our earliest risk tolerance questionnaire, and research shows that people who have the emotional processing centers of their brain damaged actually have trouble making even the simplest decision. So what types of people are really good investors, right? What types of people are really good investors? Well, there's a couple of groups that were studied. I said that people with brain damage actually had trouble making everyday decisions. They have trouble making decisions around, what color suit to wear, what kind of ice cream they want. But people who have the emotional processing centers of their brain damaged actually are great gamblers and great financiers and great investment decision makers. Another group that does very well is people who speak 2 languages. Who here is bilingual? I heard a whole ton of different languages out in the hall today. Yeah, lots of bilingual folks. Bilingual folks make better decisions than those who just speak 1 language, but only when they are speaking in their non-dominant language. And why is that? Because it causes us to slow down, to pause, and to think about our decisions less reflexively. So how can we help our clients overcome emotion? Well, first of all, we can teach them emotional regulation techniques. Got some listed there. This RAIN model is one I would suggest you look up. It's an emotional regulation technique. And I don't think advisors have always thought about themselves as behavioral coaches, but I think Nick was right on when he talked about some of the highest and best work we do being around managing client behavior. The second thing we can do is we can use emotion to our benefit. My favorite study of all time is a study that looked at low-income savers who were making minimum wage and having a terrible time setting aside any money for a rainy day. They tried rewards, they tried punishments, they tried everything they could, and nothing could get these folks to save enough money. Until they tried one thing. They attached to their bank account, they worked with the bank to have it so that a picture of their children would flash up for 5 seconds before they would make a decision about their spending, right? So you had to look at a picture of your kids for 5 seconds before you could make a financial decision. When they did this, savings behavior increased 250%. Are we making finance personal? Are we tying our decisions back to the things that they value emotionally? Because this can be a huge boon to us. As I close out here, I want to leave you with some research that I did on the advisor of the future. This is research I did last summer where I surveyed hundreds and hundreds of people and asked them what do they want from a financial professional. And these were the 6 things that they wanted. These were the 6 things that emerged unambiguously. The first thing, they wanted someone who was smart. They wanted someone who was competent, had good IQ and good financial IQ. They want to know that you know what you're doing with their money. Secondly, though, they wanted someone with a great bedside manner. They wanted someone who could talk to them about these things in a way that they could understand and that they wouldn't feel belittled. Third, they wanted customization. They wanted to know that this plan and that this portfolio was custom made for just them. They wanted technological access, they wanted communication in times of fear, and they wanted most of all peace of mind. They wanted most of all just not to think about it. When you look at these things, some of them are differentiators going forward, and some of them are not. Technology gets cheaper over time, and what was once cutting edge is soon everybody has it, right? But 4 of these other things have behavior at their core. Things like EQ, things like communication, peace of mind. All of these things have human behavior at their core. And if you can do these things well, it is a differentiator that can never, never be taken from you. because it's something that no robo-advisor can replicate. It's something that your competition can't replicate in the same way that you can. It allows you to be uniquely you. I hope that you will take the time to seek out the best books by myself, books by Nick and others who write about human nature, human behavior, because this is your competitive advantage. This is your enduring competitive advantage. I am the son of a financial advisor, and I have seen firsthand that the work you do saves lives and improves lives. But our ability to save these lives, to improve these lives, has a ceiling on it that is capped by our knowledge of human behavior. So it's my hope and my prayer that you will seek out the best learning about human behavior en route to doing what you do even better. Thank you.
Together we suffer and inside. I'm tired of fighting the good fight.